What is up, everybody? I'm No Lux Given here with your afternoon snap, and today Kitty Pryde has been re-released back into Marvel Snap, so I'm recommending Sandwave. Both Sandman and the newly buffed Wave are both really good against Kitty Pryde and basically just stop it in its tracks. And from what I've seen, a lot of people were excited to play with Kitty Pryde today. I've seen a lot of it, and this deck is just really good to capitalize on everyone playing Kitty Pryde today, and it's also pretty good with today's featured location, Milano. This deck has a few nice ways to add power to locations that you can't play cards to, with Claw, Doctor Doom, and Vision. Though you do have to watch out a little bit because Ebony Maw also locking down a location can make things a little bit tricky. I'm going to talk about some card replacements right now as well. So like I said, your mileage may vary on Ebony Maw specifically, but this is still the list that I recommend. Now, that said, this isn't the list that I'm actually playing. You might have seen that I had a Kang in the last clip. You could try out Kang. Ultimately, I don't really love it. I also don't have Nebula myself personally, so I'm actually just running Star-Lord to try to complete the Star-Lord mission. It's not really great in the deck, but you can play it and it's fine. It has some synergy with Odin. I would also potentially recommend Scorpion as a card to play in the deck, though Scorpion plus Leader isn't necessarily always a combo either. So yeah, just play around with what you think works depending on what you have, and you can cut any of the first 3 cards in the list, Nebula, Ebony Maw, and Lizard, as you see fit. One pro tip to keep in mind today: if Milano does not reveal itself and you are playing a card on the early turns of the game, play to an unknown location, so that way you might potentially play into Milano, and you can use this to double up on the lane lockdown and kind of remove the drawback from Ebony Maw in a way that is really beneficial. But this is also really good for Nebula, because if you play Nebula, if you can squeeze that into Milano, then your opponent's not going to be able to play there and you'll have a really large Nebula. I'm going to play Star-Lord into the Baxter Building. That's another way to add power to that third location, which is going to be Milano. And you can see what I'm talking about there. Having 10 power in Milano to start off is obviously really great. Now here's where this game gets super spicy. My opponent is going to snap as they throw down a Storm into the Baxter Building. I'm going to spoil it a little bit so I can talk about it. And then on turn 4, Mirror Dimension is either going to copy the Flooding location or it's going to copy Milano, which means there's no turn 6 this game, which could be a little bit awkward for a deck playing as many 6-drops as we are, though we do have a wave turn to take advantage of here, and this turn we could only play to the flooded location. So we're just going to try to put as much power down this turn as we possibly can, and we do get to make a nice little play here. We get to Odin our Star-Lord, which will trigger because my opponent is certainly going to play a card to the flooded location themselves this turn. And seeing that I'm going to add 10 power there, and I have Claw to add more power, plus I might win in Milano, I'm going to snap back, and we're going to battle for it and see what we can do on this one. And the card that my opponent is playing this turn, I would not have guessed it, especially with Storm on Milano's featured location day. It's Destroyer to blow up the Storm. Wave allowed them to cheat it out here. So they are currently winning in the flooded location, but we are going to be able to squeeze out a win in the flooded location with Claw, which is what I said. This deck has some ways to move around some power. So we only have to make sure they don't beat us in Milano this turn with a 5 energy card. And 5 energy, yeah, there's some things that could potentially do 8 power. They could have like Arrow or something. That would be annoying. I don't really know exactly what my opponent's playing, but I'm going to stay in it here, see what we can do. I think that they are incentivized here to battle for Milano because they're already up by 5, so if they can just double down on their power in Milano, we'll be able to secretly win the flooded location, and I think they'll just ignore the second Milano. It was confusing that both of the locations are Milano. I think my opponent's going to play left this turn, though. I don't think that they're going to play right because it's just so much, well, I guess I can't add power to the right either. So maybe they would go for the right location, just seeing as I'm not able to play there. Let's see what my opponent actually winds up going for. They do play to the right, and it's a Tuma to win it, but Titania is going to allow us to win the other Milano, as my opponent had priority, so I got to steal their Titania, and now no one is allowed to play for the final turn of the game. They'll get 2 more power into their Nebula, and we'll grab the win. This game I thought was fun just to showcase how this deck can add power to Milano despite not being able to play there on most turns. Again, we're going to see that my opponent is playing a Kitty Pryde Hitmonkey deck. These decks are just everywhere today, which is the main reason that I'm recommending Sandwave, though, like I said, it is really good with Milano as well. We've got Dr. Doom to add some power to Milano this turn, and we also have Vision, which will kind of be interesting. This is a weird game because of Mindscape, so we won't be able to play Odin or Magneto, one of our more expensive cards, on the final turn of the game. But because we're also going to be switching hands, it actually makes Sandman a little bit awkward too, because I'm going to be Sandmanning myself, more likely, as I'm going to grab a bunch of cheap cards from my opponent. So this game's a little bit weird, but we will get to see another interesting way to play with Milano, which is Vision, kind of like Avengers Compound. We're playing to Milano on the one turn that we can, and then if my opponent is able to beat us in Milano and we don't want that power there, we can just move Vision elsewhere and try to win the other 2 locations. So that's kind of the plan. It gives you a little bit more flexibility, which I think is fun. Now, what actually winds up happening here, I was not expecting. My opponent is going to, well, we'll see my Vision flip over first. They're going to Rhino in Mindscape and turn that off. So maybe I should have just played Sandman. That might have worked out better for me. But I still think we're in an okay position here. We get to keep Odin, so I get to play Odin on Dr. Doom for 18 power on the final turn. That's always good. The Doombots will win us the Ruins and win us Milano. We'll just keep Vision where it is, and then we'll be up by 12 power in the hub, and hopefully that's enough to take it as well. So up by 12 power in the hub and up by 3 power in Milano should be enough to grab the win. Now, one thing that was also kind of funny this game, I did not realize it. I was like, okay, Rhino, that's a pretty heads-up play. They grabbed Rhino from the hub this game. We grabbed Sentry. My opponent grabbed Rhino. So really great, clever use of that. They are going to just wind up retreating, so there you go. I wanted to take a look at some other fun games that I played with this deck today, including this one featuring the Nexus. Now, I do always recommend playing Ebony Maw to that 3rd location, just in case it's Milano, but it's also just good practice because then you can claw into that location to still add more power there, as opposed to playing Ebony Maw in the right. Though, unfortunately, that is going to bite you sometimes. Murder World is our 3rd location this game, so we're going to lose the Ebony Maw and all of the power that comes with it, unfortunately. So, not the best, but I think there's still a lot of ways to win this game. The Nexus, with a deck like this playing a bunch of really powerful cards, could still be pretty good. So I'm going to wave on this turn. My opponent is actually going to wave as well, and one thing that I was considering here was maybe I would go like wave into Odin, into Leader, into Magneto. That could certainly be an interesting line, though the fact that my opponent is also waving kind of just makes me want to play a Leader myself this turn. Now, I do think that there's a potential it could be a Galactus list. Galactus lists running Jeff, I don't think are totally out of the realm of possibilities, so I just decide to Leader over here, see what we get from that, and looks like it might be a Galactus list. My opponent is going to drop a Dr. Octopus. Now, unfortunately, that's going to stop a lot of my plans this game, because it means I'm not really going to be able to add more power to the Nexus other than through Bishop getting some activations, and it also means I don't get to steal my opponent's Dr. Octopus with my Leader. Now, I can still move Vision out of the Nexus, so I'll still be able to add a little power to that location, but for the most part, we're not going to be able to add as much power as I thought we might. So a little bit awkward. I'm just going to drop Lizard this turn. That's really the only thing that I can do. And I'm going to hope that my opponent doesn't put too much power into the Nexus. And they Spider-Man me. So I'm not going to be able to play into the Nexus next turn at all. And then they're just going to play a Yondu. That's not a big deal. But despite this looking kind of bad for me, and I do think my opponent's plan this turn is to move Jeff out of the Nexus, probably into Camp Lehigh, and then just play their biggest card into the Nexus, which is probably just America Chavez at this point. So if we do the math, we can see that Jeff moving out of the Nexus and then Magneto moving Wave and Spider-Man out of the Nexus means that they are then going to have 19 power at the location. So they will still win the Nexus, but they will lose in the other two locations. They will lose in Murder World, where we are adding... So they're adding 3 power to Camp Lehigh because they're still going to have 19 power in the Nexus, and then they're adding Jeff there. And then they are adding 6 power into Murder World, but we're adding 12. So it's a very close game. We did all the math. We're going to win this one. It looks pretty good. But they actually don't have America Chavez. It's a very tricky thing, but because of Murder World and because of Yondu, they are actually able to play Death on the final turn. Now, it still wasn't enough, but it was super, super close, and I was not expecting Death to get played there because only 2 things had to get destroyed. The Nexus is always fun at leading to some really high-powered games of Marvel Snap, but one of the most fun locations and one of the craziest ones is always going to be Sinister London. So we'll look at one of those as well. Nebula into Sinister London isn't great. The other Nebula winds up being better, but the Nebula that you play in Sinister London, like, I'm going to play all of my cards to, or as many of my cards as possible to Sinister London this game. So that particular Nebula isn't going to be that fantastic. Double Zabu, that's pretty cool. But the one thing that you do have to worry about in a Sinister London game is, are you going to run out of space? Are you going to run out of space in Sinister London primarily, but just overall, are you going to run out of space? So there is actually some interesting decisions to make. Do you want to play Wave into Sinister London? I decide to because I'm going to play a card on turns 3, 4, 5, and 6, so those are all just going to go into Sinister London. But the one thing that it does kind of remove is Leader as really a great option. If you play Leader, then you copy Leader, and your opponent played a card into Sinister London, you'll get 2 more cards into Sinister London, and then you'll be locked out of that location for the rest of the game. So not actually going to worry about Leader in this one. I'm just going to drop Sandman. I'm also thinking about Vision and Stature as potential options, but I think just locking my opponent out with Sandman is a pretty good place to start. Next turn, I'll play Vision, and then we'll see if I draw anything better after that. My opponent is going to play my Leader from the Daily Bugle. That's just going to give them a Sandman. That's not a huge deal. I actually got just about as much power as they did this turn. One of the reasons that I went for the Sandman too is I'm just going to let my opponent have Asgard. There's not too much I can do with Asgard considering I played Ebony Maw there, so one thing that I can do is just Sandman them, so that way they aren't going to be able to play all of the cards that they draw off of Asgard. And then this turn my opponent plays double Black Bolt, which is kind of cool, but won't really affect me. You can take all of my cheap cards. As long as I get to keep my expensive cards this turn, I'll play Double Vision for 14 power. And then here's kind of what I was talking about on the final turn of the game. My opponent cannot play into Sinister London, so the most they can drop is maybe like, 9 power, maybe even 7 power only with their Stature, but we're going to be able to drop 24 power on the final turn of the game, so this will still allow me to grab the win in Sinister London, and then I should be able to win wherever Magneto lands here after duplicating itself. So pretty cool game, I thought, and we'll see what my opponent winds up playing on the final turn of it all. They will play... Let's see. I'll just jump ahead here. They're going to play a Darkhawk and then a Jeff. And Darkhawk isn't even that much power, only 6 on the final turn. We'll move around their Miles Morales a little bit, but we actually win all 3 locations. Well, we tie in Asgard after Nebula triggers, but still a pretty great showing for the deck. Here's one more funny clip that I wanted to showcase. I play Star-Lord on the first turn into that unknown location. My opponent doesn't know what's up, so they play Armor into that first location instead, which actually has a huge impact on the rest of the game, but I'm going to keep hoping that that third location is Milano, and I'm going to play my Lizard there as well. And unfortunately, it is not Milano, it is Rickety Bridge. So I really wish that my opponent had played Armor there for multiple reasons. One thing I also wanted to note, and part of the reason I included this game, do not play Wave on turn 2 anymore. That will lock everybody out on turn 3 because Elysium will make it so that will not discount the cards after wave. So that's just something to pay attention to. But I lose 2 of my cards here to Rickety Bridge, a little bit annoying. My opponent doesn't play Colossus into Rickety Bridge. I think that could have been a good play from them. And one of the awkward things here too is I have lost priority going into turn 4, which means my opponent gets to flip over Professor X before I can flip over Dr. Doom. I was hoping to put a Doombot there to scare my opponent out of that location, but unfortunately, they've won it with Professor X for now. We've got Claw, so we can grab a surprise win on the Rickety Bridge in the final turn, and that's kind of what I'm banking on and feeling like we might be able to get away with something here. So I'm going to go Magneto into Stark Tower. That's going to be a ton of power here on turn 5, and actually enough to win me Stark Tower. And now I can win Rickety Bridge with Claw. So I think I've won this game, and I snap, and I'm super excited to drop Claw, and I quickly press the end turn button, and then I realize what deck my opponent is playing, and I try to hit the retreat button. I can't because I've already snapped. My opponent is probably playing a Spectrum deck. So all I can do from this point is emote. I decide to go with an I am confident emote, and maybe my opponent either doesn't have Spectrum or won't be confident enough to play it, but I think I've lost this one for 4 cubes, and funny enough, my opponent actually retreated, so my confidence paid off. I just thought that was a really funny clip to end off with there for today. That's going to be it for me. Thank you guys very much for watching. I'm No Lex Given. Peace.